Hi, everybody. This is Warren Herman, and today we're going to speak about the subject of religious vocation once again. It's interesting that in our spiritual lives, there's a lot of confusion about the nature of vocation. And I think this confusion can be illuminated by a scene from the movie The Last Samurai. In this movie, Tom Cruise is playing the main character, and he has a conversation. The main character has this conversation with the samurai Katsumoto. And Katsumoto is, they're about to have a battle that is going to decide the fate of, this group of people. And so they are trying to figure out what to do. And so Katsumoto says he is almost having this kind of passive outlook. And he says, "What can I do? I must accept my fate." And and the main character says, "I believe that a man does what he can, only then is his true fate revealed." It's interesting because there is this dichotomy in this quote between action and fate, so to speak. There's this thing of like what's going to happen and what I'm going to make happen. And in a way, there is this kind of passive attitude that Katsumoto has, which says, I'm going to accept whatever fate has for me. And in a Christian context, we are accepting whatever God's will is for us. And part of God's will for us is determining what he calls us to do. And I think that this that there actually is a false understanding of God implicit in some of our vocational discernment. And this false understanding of God is that God is not operating in us and in everything. There is still a sense in which God's operation is seen as somewhat hampered by our own operation, rather than this truly transcendent and immanent understanding, which is appropriate, where God is kind of like doing what we do, that he works in us to will. This is even in the scriptures. St. Paul says something like this, like to will and to work. I can't. He works in you to will his good pleasure. This is this phrase where it's like, if we have this understanding, however, of vocation, where it's like, okay, what does God want me to do, and we're just looking for what we want him to do, we can't look for something he wants us to intend. Like if we could say, like, imagine asking yourself, do I intend to go to college? And you try to figure out whether you intend to go to college before you go. That's a really bizarre way of making a choice. Like you kind of keep asking yourself, maybe I want to go to college. Maybe I'm going to go to college. Maybe and you try to figure it out. Like you're like, okay, do I have a desire to go to college? And you look for it or something. Or do I have an intention of going to college? And you keep trying to find it. That's a kind of a really weird thing to do. Because the thing is, you can't find the intention, you generate the intention. And this brings us to something that's very interesting. We already were mentioning this Japanese story, of The Last Samurai. And in the Buddhist context, there is something very similar to vocation, which is aspiration. And of course, in the Buddhist context, there's not a sense in which God is planting the aspiration in us, so therefore it's seen as an aspiration, something we generate rather than something we are given. But it nevertheless illuminates something about the vocational process to think about vocation as aspiration, because if we aspire to do something, we have control over whether we aspire to do something. And we should remember that just because we have a worldview in which God is ultimately in control, it's not a worldview that should bring us to a passivity, because God works in us to will what we will and to desire what he desires. So if we can conceive of generating the desire for a vocation, that is in a sense God generating it in us. So the thing is, sometimes it's almost like we must truly embrace the attitude of that main character in The Last Samurai, and have this sense of we do what we can, only then will our true fate be revealed. We intend to embrace God as much as possible. We try to respond as generously to his call and appropriately to his call based on like all the different factors in our lives. And only then will our true vocation be revealed. It's not something we find, it's something we intend, because we can't find our intentions. We must generate them. And so that's kind of an interesting thing. And when we generate them, God's generating them in us, because he's the only one that generates those generous responses. There's too many generous things in that sentence. But that's the thing, because God is moving us. God is moving the actual movements that we must make. So that's because it just illuminates kind of how we're looking at God in this process. And so that is something that really is, something that's important. And I think that's something that can really help us in our growth and can really aid us in not being stuck in our vocational discernment.